My name's Hobie Darling, and I am a partner and co-founder at Liminal Collective. We're a group that has had the honor of working with some of the best athletes, creatives, and government operators around the world over the last years, getting to work with people like Red Bull and everything from surfing and skateboarding with Big Wave to SEALs to cyber operators to NBA, NFL, etc. And today I'm joined by two experts in their field, and we're going to talk about what we're seeing in the world of performance, both with today and then a little bit about what we see in the future as well. Before jumping in, I'm going to turn it to my fellow panelists to introduce themselves, and then we can go forward.
So my name is Vincent Tucker. I'm the Director of Strategy and Innovation at Logitech G, and what that role encompasses is our product portfolio, so any Logitech G product that comes out, as well as trying to figure out what the next thing is and how to get there.
My name is Parth Naidu. I'm the General Manager of the League of Legends division at TSM. For me, it's mostly about handling everything performance related that encompasses between the academy team, LCS team, facility, performance, that kind of all ties together.
Cool. So here's where we're going to start out. Does anyone know what this picture is of? Anyone? Raise your hand if you know what it is. Oh, so we got decent play. Anyone tell me what it is? Over in the corner.
Me?
Yes.
He just broke a 2-hour marathon.
Yes, that's Eliud Kipchoge, who just broke the 2-hour marathon. Any idea why we start with this slide? Performance is a huge part of it. Yep, back in the back. Technology was a huge part of it. You guys are hitting exactly on it. So for us, what we're going to talk about in the panel today is when we think about people reimagining what's possible, and whether that's in esports in this case, how are they doing it? How are they thinking? What are they doing? And Italy is just an example that just happened a couple weeks ago of you think about one of the longest standing records that's been out there, and one of the longest ideas that people have had is what are we capable of as humans, was breaking the 2-hour marathon. Anyone know what the time was on a minutes per mile to break the 2-hour marathon? It was about 4 minutes and 30 seconds per mile. So imagine what we thought was possible if you went 100 years ago, what it looked like with the fastest marathons in the world were around 3 hours. We've now, over that time, broken it down to 2 hours. And so we use that part to start to think about if we know what we know today around the esports athlete, think about as we jump forward what we think is possible. So a couple of things we're going to talk about today. One, we're going to put up some models that we've just seen around performance to try to give some really actionable pieces that people can take away and go, hey, how should I think about that potentially in my organization? Or how could I think about that for me personally as a gamer? Then off of that, we're going to get to hear really from the experts. I mean, these guys are some of the best in the world at what they do when we think about, as you noted, around equipment. How do we help someone do what's never been done? As we think about putting people in places to be able to accomplish what's never been done with Parth. So kicking that off, this is just a model that we use a lot in human performance. And what you'll notice on it is you'll notice a human in the middle, right? And that's there for a reason, because all of this starts with a human, whether that's an esports athlete or whether that's Eliud Kipchoge going, we are all come from this place that starts with being a person. Around that, we start to think about what are the things that go into doing things that have never been done, or elite performance. And very often, what we see, and especially, even when we work with different esports teams, it gets really focused on skill, 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 play, 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 right? And when you start to think in a bigger human performance model, you start to go, but what does it look like if we start to take skills, but also the physical side, the psychology side, the technology side, the nutrition side, medical? I won't walk through all of these, but really, this side facing me, where we start to see this is what separates the best in the world. It's often not their skills, right? It's often about what do they bring to the game that's different than anyone else has been able to bring in that. And so I show this slide one as a place to start, because it's where we start what we call our elite performance model on where do we want to focus when we think about reimagining best in the world. But also as you go back to your organization and start thinking, hey, what's the broader look if you're thinking about an esports athlete of what we need to be thinking about to best support them? And then what are the areas that we want to prioritize? And Parth in a second is going to talk about, we did this exercise with TSM, and he'll share a little bit, as TSM looked to today and the future, what they were thinking about around that. The second model that we talk about a lot when we think about reimagining what's possible is what we call the 70-20-10 rule. You can see why we call that, right? 70% being the base of the foundation of what are those things that we know from science that are proven in the research that go, if you're not doing these things, it's really hard to be the best in the world, right? Those are things like, what does your training program look like? What does the deliberate practice program look like? If we think about things that are as basic as sleep, right? Are we getting the 7 to 9 hours or other ways that we're regenerating? As we're thinking about movement, are we actually moving both to open up neuroplasticity, but also to be in states where we're performing at our best? What are those things that we know, and how are we doing that? One of the things we find when we work with the best in the world often is that they will, or I should actually back that up. Sometimes when we work with people who aren't the best in the world, what we see is, there's a deficit on those first principles, or the 70%. They're often looking for, what are the things that I can do that's the silver bullet, but maybe I don't have to train quite as hard. Maybe I don't have to get the 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Maybe I can, cut it short on nutrition or on movement, etc. So this is where we always start. So again, I would go back to, as you're thinking about your organizations, as you're thinking about yourself as an esports player, how are you thinking about what are those things that are in the foundation, the first principles, the 70%, that I should be doing every day, every week, every month of every year, right? And really putting those down on a piece of paper and going, this is my base foundation. The second level off of that is what we call the 20%, which are those things that are maybe not quite as based in science, but you know what? When we look at people who are doing things that are pushing the boundaries, they're finding some interesting things around them, right? And so this is looking around at different communities and going, potentially if I'm in esports, what are people in the creative spaces? What's someone at Cirque du Soleil doing to get better? What's someone potentially as a cyber operator looking to get better? What's, and we'll tell a story again back to TSM. If we're having problems, potentially with carpal tunnel and so forth, what are people doing around, and who are the best in the world around wrist injuries? What am I looking at maybe USA Olympics, from the gymnast perspective? And what do those look like? But this is the area where we start to go, this is not what everybody is doing, but it's where it starts to have a strategic advantage. So as you think about getting that base down, what are the things I should be doing every day? And then what are those things where I want to start to get a little bit more of a strategic advantage? But it's only about 20%, right? So it's not where I'm focusing everything. And then the last 10% or 5 to 10% are those things where you go, when I want to reimagine what's possible, when I want to do the Eliud Kipchoge of I want to break the 2-hour marathon, what are those things that I'm starting to put into my program to go, you know what? I better be trying some things that no one else in the world is trying, because everybody's doing the 70%. A lot of people are doing the 20%. But what's kind of my magic as I start to think about what moves up the curve? So on that, I'm going to turn it to Parth to have him talk a little bit. He's the expert, one of the world experts as a GM with TSM. What are you guys doing at TSM when you think about performance, and what does that journey look like for you?
For sure. So before I get into the journey of TSM, I want to walk through the journey of League of Legends in the last 10 years. We're coming up on the 10th season of League of Legends esports as a whole right now. It was season 5 before first coaches were legitimized by the league. I took them, even after that, it took some Western teams a lot longer to recognize that coaches are a very integral part of a team dynamic. It took us till maybe season 6 or season 7 to recognize mental health. We started to bring on sports psychologists. We tried a lot of different models. I can give you a little example. In terms of the challenges that we face, a lot of the sports psychologists or staff members with soft skills that we came across that we wanted to find that were experts in the field, they didn't have as much nuance or context about esports and what they needed. So the difference between traditional sports and esports is that a lot of the training goes into your cognitive load versus the physical load. And so the way you approach the training is entirely different than how you approach it with like a traditional athlete. So we have to, as esports organizations, contextualize what we need in order to strengthen our players and tailor our specific programs to that. So now we're approaching season 8 or 9. Like you said, the 70-20-10 model, most people know how to get talent on their rosters. We've always had rosters with a lot of talent. We've won the North American Championship 6 times, but our dream is to obviously win the World Championships, and no North American team has done that yet. And it hasn't been a lack of talent. It hasn't been a lack of infrastructure or coaching. We're trying to determine how TSM can be the first team to find our own way in North America to make sure that our advantage is what's giving us the edge compared to the other teams in the league.
So how do you hit on that? So I mean, you go, that's a moonshot. That's an Eliud Kipchoge,
Yeah.
break the 2-hour marathon, North America being best teams in the world.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about that model, and we got to go through this exercise around the elite performance model,
Yep.
what are the things you're thinking about in those buckets, and how are you implementing them?
For sure. So like I said, everyone has talent, everyone has a coach, everyone has all of these things. The biggest focuses for TSM in the next few years is our focus on health, both mental and physical health, and technology and how we use it. So, I mean, we have Vincent here who will talk about our collaboration with sort of Logitech and all the stuff that they're doing, and we'll kind of break it down after.
Cool. So let's hit on that. So again, keeping with that red thread of Elliot doing something that's never impossible, one of the things he talks about is there are a couple things that made a difference for him. One was the equipment. How many people have seen the Vaporfly shoe, the 4%? Big New York Marathon a couple weekends ago, of whether it should be legal or not, even on that. As you think about being one of the leading manufacturers from an equipment side, how do you think about when Parth goes, I want to be the North America team that becomes truly the best in the world, goes out, beats the Koreans, et cetera? How do you think about the equipment side of that and putting them in a perspective to win?
So what we think about is, the first and foremost, we have to target
I'll give you that so you can click too.
the elite athletes. And in simple terms, here, this is one slide from marketing that talks about everything that we've done. But the real work happened at this level, where we had 5, 10, 12 different models, where we were talking with 50 plus world-class esports athletes around the entire world, everywhere from North America to Korea to Germany, everywhere around the world, and extracting from them through feedback what it was that they were looking for. So akin to a runner, they were very interested, or they needed the lightweight, because they play for hours upon hours upon hours every day, so they needed to address the fatigue. When we launched the Pro X Wireless, which is what this product is about, what we ended up doing was we were the lightest wireless mouse ever launched at that moment in time. And that particular product has been adopted by a number of different players, whether or not they're sponsored by Logitech or not. This is an iterative, this is just a gift that goes along and shows you the iterative cycles that we went through to try to develop this product. Some of the other takeaways that we had is we had to develop a product that could address both right-handed and left-handed players. And again, this is all feedback that comes directly from the pros. The pros themselves are very, very specific about what it is that they want. So for example, for a consumer who's playing a game, they want maybe lots of buttons. The pros want very few buttons, but they want some on the left side, some on the right side. So how do we solve that problem? One of the other things about this particular product is this is from the OWL Championship last year in Brooklyn. And the player who won the MVP was using this product before it was launched. So we put lots of our products in the hands of the pros so that they can give us, again, this feedback, so they can tell us what the right thing to do is and what the wrong thing to do is, so we can tune it.
Cool, so switching over a little bit, Parth. So we've talked about equipment, we've talked about a bit of the 70% and what you guys are thinking about. Let's look to the future a little bit. So as you look out, and let's go back to that big moonshot and even frame it in that. If you're going, hey, how do you get TSM to be the best in the world? How are you thinking about the 20 and the 10% on that model? What's on your mind?
Sure. So like Vincent said, it's a lot of iteration with players. So in terms of, so everyone has headset, keyboard, mouse, and they obviously have like their options and customization. And our players, like when they go on stage, they need to have the right amount of like mouse settings that they use in practice. But on top of that, the 20%, the 10%, we're going to be launching our facility next year. Our facility is going to encompass everything that an esports player ever needs in order to perform. So some of the moonshots that we're going for is that picture over there is like a sleep pod. We found that a lot of players, the way we structure practice is we cause them a lot of burnout. They have no time during the day to take time for themselves, go out. So we're going to have cryotherapy and sleep pods in our facility. We're also, like Matt said in the last session, a separation of work and space is something that TSM has never had because the industry standard so far has been gaming houses. But we are completely dedicating the second floor of our facility to be an esports center. That's going to come full with a kitchen and a chef. There's going to be a training center, gym, and like a separate space for them to both play and do reviews, watch VODs, and just have a more professional environment. So a lot of these things, while they do sound like extraneous to a lot of the organizations that currently operate, we think are going to push the envelope and create like a good foundation. So when 3 or 4 years down the line, when talent is more equalized across teams, having an organization with this foundation of helping players is going to really push us to the next level.
Super cool. How about for you, Vincent, when you think about the future on the equipment side and what you're seeing, where do you see the future?
So the analogy that I have is when you think about traditional sports, like a baseball player is approached by someone like Rawlings or something, and they have a glove, and they get used to the glove, and they have the confidence in the glove. What I think about from an equipment perspective is it's going to go into personalization, right? So there's going to be a product that's made for this player, whereas today most of the players they'll collaborate with whoever they're working with, but fundamentally they pick between small, medium, and large. And in the future, especially with the advent and the maturity of new technologies, there's going to be an opportunity to make a product for a person and then deliver that. That way they can attain whatever their maximum potential is.
Yeah. And one thing I'll actually add to that as well is one thing that we haven't found for players in games, especially, is feedback in terms of when they're learning their skills and improving their skills. It's all based on whether or not you won or lost, and scrims, practices, etc. So with Blitz.gg, we're creating like additional products that give live feedback to players while they're playing in terms of if they're making a skill shot, are they hitting it or missing it? In terms of eye tracking, when they are like taking a break in the game or they are respawning, are they constantly active or are they not focusing as much? So all this data is all this work is starting right now, and it's going to push the boundaries of what's going to come in the next 5 years.
Super cool. So we flipped up this picture, Parth. Mm-hmm. So very different than all of the technology that you just hit on, and eye tracking and sleep pods and etc. Mm-hmm. This was from a camp that we got to do together a couple months ago. Yep. It was definitely in the 20 and 10%, of what was going on. Tell us a little bit about this picture and what was going on at that camp.
So this camp for us was about pushing the players out of their comfort zone. Generally what we find with esports players, at least traditionally that I've worked with, is they feel like they constantly need to improve their skills 24/7, and they're not willing to put themselves out of their comfort zone because they don't think that there's any value in it. They think that the amount of time they put in, if they just put in more time, they'll be better. This camp was really about exploring, helping expose them to a different approach to how much they can actually push themselves, even if they don't think that they can. So we took them out, and we pushed them basically into the ocean. You guys will see the pictures up there. We had them do meditation. We had them hold their breath for 2 minutes or longer. They got to see that if they open their eyes to a different approach to performance, it could apply to their game as well. So this is one of the pictures that really, really pushed the envelope.
Yeah, so what's going on in this picture is you can see up on the screen, those people have Zephyrs on, so it's measuring heart rate variability, breathing rate, some stress rate, and have put them in a spot where they're all holding hands with their teammates, all having just done an exercise together on how do I think about being in high arousal, and then how do I think about, let's just call that tilt, high arousal, how do I start as a team and as an individual start to bring myself back to a performance state, but very different than you might see it. Similarly, this was an exercise around, if we think about League of Legends and how important the team piece is of that, how do we start to operate as one team versus individuals on a team? So putting them in very different circumstances. And then this was the conclusion of camp. Are you in this one, Parth?
I am not.
I don't think you are you? You were watching on this one. So this was essentially going, how do we think about with this team, again, back to the moonshot, and Parth put this to us very early on of, we want to be the very best in the world. What are some of the tools we can use? And what we saw over and over again during the week is there was lots of technology, there was lots of analytics, but what a lot of it came back to when we thought about that moonshot was back to what we started with, which is we're all humans, right? We are all people linking hands on a team, going into the ocean, doing something hard, whatever that looks like for our paradigm. So this was the end of that camp of bringing everybody together. I think for some of them it was maybe one of their best days. With some, it was maybe one of their worst days of their life. But give us final comments on just what the takeaway was, and then we'll go to Q&A.
I was actually surprised. The most striking thing for me was one of the players who initially was really hesitant. They're like, why am I spending 3 or 4 days in Malibu doing this when I could be practicing instead? Which is like a very standard response. And when they got back, that same player told me, wow, I did not know I was able to hold my breath for longer than 2 minutes underwater, which is crazy. And then he was a lot more open, at least for a month or so. I mean, to us trying new things. He was like, he actually changed his diet after that, because he learned a lot about diet in terms of how much it would help him improve his performance and how he could go on for multi-game sets. Because what I found with a lot of esports players is they all want to win, and they just have their own initial idea of what it takes to get there, which is just grind, grind, grind 24/7. And as an organization, we want to take risks. We want to expose them to a different approach, because a cognitive load is a lot more than just like basically muscle memory. It's a lot about how to work with teammates, how to work with, how to deal with stress, and everything that organizations can do to even help that by 5% is going to really push that team over the edge.
Super cool. Well, with that, we'll open it up for a little bit of Q&A here. Anybody? Yes.
So I was kind of wondering where you kind of draw the line as far as like these new technologies, where it's like, okay, this is cool that it's helping our players out, but where's it that it's an unfair competitive advantage to them? Because I've been on the side where, like, I know that every PC that you guys are competing with, it has to have like the same specs, like even down to like the SSD, even though like it's a different manufacturer, the same speed and everything like that. The fact that it's a different manufacturer is unfair, because someone could be like, oh, because they have that, that's unfair. But you're talking about a mouse that's really great and things like that, that's super lightweight. And perhaps someone will see that as like, oh, because they were playing with that, it's an unfair advantage. I understand the fact that everyone needs their own peripherals and things like that, but is there a line in terms of that?
Yeah, good question. So just so everyone can hear on the stream as well. So the question was around, as we think about technology and we think about competitive advantage, and when does it go over the line of it's now unfair versus it's fair to use that? You want to start that one, Vincent, as a tech leader?
So when I think about the technologies, like there's so many people out there that make products that are used in esports. The technology advances actually fairly quickly, right? You'll see mice out there that have 12,000 DPI, 18,000 DPI, 20,000 DPI. When we look at what's happened with the technology, how accurate it is, and how people are using it, what we found is actually the area of most improvement is you have response rates on products that are like 1 millisecond or even sub 1 millisecond. Whereas for a human to see the input, process it, and then send the signal back, that's like 300 milliseconds. So the area that from our research has been where we can make the biggest improvement is in helping the players, which is why Logitech G works so closely with all of these players. The equipment itself it's very similar, right? But from a user perspective, from a pro's perspective, it's about comfort, it's about getting acclimated to it, it's about reliability, and that's where we try to differentiate ourselves.
Cool, great question. Nilesh? Yes, sir.
This is for Parth. I know you mentioned how a lot of these athletes may not recognize how this, like I said, could take them out of their comfort zone and go into the ocean to go through this. Now, what are some of the main barriers or education pieces that you do to educate them on why this is more helpful than just training an extra 6 hours, going out with teammates? What are some of the pieces that you would use to talk to these young players?
Sure. So first thing is obviously support staff. We need support staff to help explain the players and work with them throughout the year to help them take rest, help them make sure that they're sleeping in time, eating healthy, because once they understand that, they will start to follow that routine and to help keep up with it. Additionally, we have people like Hobie that we kind of lean on to bring them on, do a boot camp, educate them, because obviously we're not the experts, right? We lean on a lot of the experts in the industry. One thing that Hobie brought up in just the elite performance model isn't that you're not trying to be the best in the esport industry. You can learn from every other industry out there. You can learn from brain surgeons. You can learn from Red Bull athletes. Like, there's already so much data and information about people doing exceptional things that we can draw on, and Hobie's group is like a really big expert of it, that we lean on experts like that to help educate the players.
Yeah, the only part I would add to that at least has worked for us across disciplines with esports as well, is there is great research around a lot of it. And so if we're thinking about, with the League of Legends team, and we go, hey, team is very important here. So what do we know if we go back to literature on what are the key factors on great teams that we know? It starts with psychological safety and trust. Oh, okay, well, here's my correlation to success on that. And as soon as you start to show that to a player, they go, okay, well, maybe I'm willing to try this at least a little bit because it's based in data. And so we always, even though some of these things will look non-traditional, they're actually very based in research and science. And so we try to share both sides of that as well.
It also comes with experience too. So one of our players in Spring Split, we went through a series and it was 5 games. It was 5.5 hours long. Towards the end, or after the game, or after the match, he told me that after games 3 or 4, he was feeling really fatigued, and that really incentivized him to change his diet once that was really brought up. If you have teams who work with really hard teammates to work with, despite their skill level, they start to understand that trust and leadership and communication is a lot more important. So it also does come with experience from players.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yes, ma'am.
So I know you talked about the player learned that nutrition was really important, so he kind of took that on himself to change his lifestyle. But I wanted to hear kind of how you've noticed a change in the trend from, in the beginning of esports, it's kind of like we stay up all night and we scrim and we play. We put play over everything because we think that's how, we think the person who plays and practices the longest is going to be the best team. But now that we're starting to learn how all these healthy habits tie in to actually make you more successful, now it's this player who's played longer than me is more tired than me, so now I'm better because I actually slept 8 hours. How do you kind of balance that out now and not be like the dad or the boss and make sure your players are practicing these healthy habits, getting to bed on time without kind of being like telling them what to do?
Yeah, so obviously that line is it's a gray area, right? You don't want to tell them what to do, but you still have to instill good habits in them. At TSM, we believe in order to be the best, you need to both work harder than everyone else, but also work smarter. And part of working smarter is to know when you want to cut back on how much you play. So, for example, in 2016 and 2017, for 2 months, we installed sleep trackers on the players, obviously with their permission. And then every day, we showed them data on this is how much sleep you've gotten. This is how your performance was during the day. This is how many times you woke up at night. And there was clear correlation between the data we showed and how they performed during the day. We've done the same thing with heart rate variability. We put on those, not the vest, but we had a different thing that we put on them when they went on stage. And they got to see their data of during high stress moments in the game, this is how they performed, versus low stress in the moments in the game. And then we could also compare it to when they got a lot of sleep versus less sleep. So you can't force the player to go to sleep or stay up, etc. But you can show them as much data as possible to help inform and change their opinions.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, and it's a great question, as part of it is, as humans, we know that we can go really hard for short amounts of time, right? I mean, we just know that from an autonomic nervous system perspective. What's really hard is to go really hard for long amounts of time. And I think that's where some of that starts to come in. That goes, you talk with young players. And by the way, this is hard when you talk to NBA players, NFL players. This is not a gaming thing by any means. But go, hey, you can probably operate in the system that you're in for a little while. But do you want to have a career that's a year or 2 years? Or do you want to be redefining how people think about gamers and can have a long career and still be the very best in the world, multiple years from now too, I think helps a little bit. So I want to thank both of you. Absolute pleasure. Parth, I mean, no one better in the world from what you're seeing in North America, and I think the moonshot around how do we think about, TSM as one of those best in the world teams. Great to hear what you're thinking about. Vincent, from a Logitech perspective, thinking how you're thinking around equipment and what the future looks like. Just such a pleasure. So thank you both. Appreciate you both sharing the panel today.